All right, so good evening. Some of you might be wondering why I'm giving this presentation about the story of Gerry Spiess, a person I never met or knew. But while doing research for my upcoming book about the boat builders of White Bear Lake, I was looking for information about Gerry. And at one point, as Dan said, I was considering just including a sidebar story in my book because Gerry wasn't a big commercial boat builder, and I couldn't find much about him besides what was in his book, and that was mostly the adventure of going across the Atlantic. And so I I looked at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I couldn't find what I wanted. So finally, I figured out how to get a hold of Sally Spiess. And thank God she answered my email. And then we talked, and then I went and visited her up in Hinckley, where she lives. And you talk about going down a rabbit hole sometimes. Well, I went down a prairie dog town. That's how much stuff we have about Gerry now. It's just unbelievable. So um, the more I learned, the more I became fascinated with. Now you got to bear with me. I have to figure out how to do this on this computer. Um, I became more fascinated with his story. There's just so much. He was a very, very complex person and very brilliant. And sometimes when I read his book, I didn't think that of him because he was struggling trying to do some basic boat building things that if he would have gone over and talked to Steve Johnson at Johnson Boat Works, he probably could have solved it in 10 minutes. But anyways, he eventually solved how to do it and built his famous boat. And so anyways, we literally got a van full of materials for the Historical Society, as Dan said, transcripts of different things, slides and videos and books and maps and so on. And so it's just amazing. And those will all be available for everyone to go look through and learn more about them. Okay, so let's move on here. Okay, so once upon a time, the Gerry Spiess story starts right here where he took this photo in about 1978. And I don't know whose car that is, but uh, that's out in front of where Johnson Boat Works was. It's over at Tally's, the original Tally's. And those are all the sailboats out there. And Gerry kept his Yankee Girl out there, not on the buoys there, but over in the docks. And that's where this whole story of the Yankee Girl started. But before we get there, this was Gerry's slide from his slide presentations. He had carousels full of them, and he would give presentations about his story. And um, he never had any notes, so I had to make all this stuff up now. So, but many other slides in here are ones Gerry used. And before I get into the Yankee Girl, I would like to share some stuff about Gerry himself. So this is part of the story that's just amazing, and I don't want to dwell a whole lot on this, but I think you should know. So Gerry was born in St. Paul. Then he lived in Australia and Mexico, where his father worked for 3M. And Gerry went to grade school in Australia, went to high school in Mexico City. He went to the University of Minnesota and got degrees in psychology and industrial education. Then he joined the Air Force, and I don't know how I don't think he had any police experience, but they made him in charge of the police on the Schilling Air Force Base. And then he became a launch control officer for the Minutemen missiles. So that's pretty good right there. If you stop the story, that's pretty impressive. Well, it kept going. Then he worked for IBM on a contract with NASA in Houston. And then he got involved with the Tony Company, a hair business. and did programming and other computer activities. And then he worked for 3M as an instructor for their copy repair staff. He was training them, but he didn't know anything about electronics, or very little. So he had to teach himself before 3M found out that he didn't know anything about electronics. And he self-studied to the point where he was an expert on electronics in the whatever it was, the 5 weeks that he had before he started. So it just shows you how, I'm telling you all this because this is how he was. He would figure stuff out. If he didn't know it, he would figure it out. Okay, then he got his teaching degree at the university, and he taught industrial arts, or whatever they called it at the time, at White Bear Mariner High School for 1 semester. And then he decided he didn't like being responsible for all those kids and power tools and other things. It was too much responsibility, and that was the end of his teaching career. But if you read in the papers and read other things, they always talk about Gerry Spiess was the White Bear Mariner teacher. And so that really wasn't true, other than for a few months. And he was just practicing. So one of the most important things he did was he taught his wife, Sally, to be a computer programmer. And she went on to be eventually in charge or vice president of a company, a $500 million a year company that was doing computer consulting and other things along those lines. So that was maybe his most important job. Okay, well, this is where Yankee Girl started. This was the Spiess home. The trees are a little bigger now than they were back when he lived there, but this is what it looked like, and that's the garage where he built the boat. And Sally told me fairly recently that this is what she thinks of Gerry as: the guy sitting at his desk, studying, planning, reading, and drafting. And this is where he drafted, at the drafting table, where he designed the famous Yankee Girl. Okay, so I have a lot of quotes in here, and I'm going to read some of these because I would rather you hear exactly what Gerry said rather than me interpret it. So he said at one point, and he had audio tapes that he started when he started working on Yankee Girl, and he recorded because he wanted to do a book eventually if he made it across the Atlantic, and record all of this stuff as he went along. So on one of those tapes, he said, It's going on 17 years now that I've been thinking about some trip of this sort. And then he said in his book, I began to understand that the only sensible way to cross any sea was by cooperating with it, and that it was fully intended, and I was fully intended to do during my next voyage. Only this time I'll build a special kind of boat. One I would design myself using everything I learned from my previous experiences. It would be radically different from any boat that had ever been built before. And he did build a few boats before this. He built a Snipe from a kit, a cabin boat called Yankee Doodle, and a trimaran called Yankee Spirit. And he had some not so successful adventures with those. So that's when he talks about learning from his other experiences. That's what he means. Okay, so on the right side there is one of his things he drafted for designing Yankee Girl. It's the rear view of it, and it was on the graph paper, and he had a whole notebook of these drawings, and he had drawings of boats and boats and more boats. Whenever he'd be somewhere with a spare minute, he would design another boat or think about what he could do. So anyways, what he said was in his book was, I was on my way. I had made 2 major decisions: the 10-foot length was I felt as small as I could reasonably go and still end up with a boat capable of navigating the high seas. And the 5.5 foot beam or width would give me sufficient room and stability. So that was, he set his box, as we might say, in designing boats for how big it was going to be. And then on the right here, again, this is the side view of the Yankee Girl, one of his many diagrams. He said, little did I know how much planning, building, and testing were still to come. Putting those first few lines down on paper was only the beginning. For the next 3 months, I spent every spare moment completing my design. That meant that after attending classes at the university every day to finish my education degree, I came home every night and hunched over my drawing board. And so it's also very interesting when you look at all these diagrams, because he has little notes all over them about stuff. And I told Jackie Potts, who was like Jerry and Sally's daughter they never had, that they should just take all these diagrams and all these things, I'll talk about lists and other things, and just compile them and just publish that, and don't say anything more than a one cover page about this was Gerry Spiess. You can look inside his head and see what he was thinking, because there's so much there, and I can just hardly touch on it tonight. Okay, so one of the things that boat builders do is they build what's called a half model. And this was a half model that Gerry made of Yankee Girl. So he said at one point, I'm working on an oak half model of the boat, and it makes it a lot easier to visualize some of the size and proportions of the boat. And so this is really pretty cool. You can't see it in the diagram here, but it's got the lines marked on there from the grid when he was measuring it out to create this. And so it's really a special piece that he used when he was building Yankee Girl. Okay, I gotta get a drink here for a second. Well, these were his more modern versions of diagrams of Yankee Girl. And I thought this was a interesting quote. Gives you an idea what he was thinking at the time. I'm not telling anyone about my plans because I don't want to be pestered or bothered by people that are against my making the trip, or people that asks a lot of questions and just bother me. So he was, even when he was taking off to go on his trip, he didn't want people around to know what he was doing because he had to focus. He was very disciplined, I guess, in not getting distracted, because he couldn't. This was a life or death sort of mission he was on. And so anyways, that's what he was thinking about, having people come to his garage and talk to him. Okay, so this is the actual construction process in his garage. And he built the boat of plywood. Many, in some parts, the keel were multiple layers, and there were some non-plywood stringers and other types of wood that he used. But then he covered the whole thing with fiberglass cloth and resin, and then sanded it all and painted it. And you can see here where he's putting the fiberglass cloth on one side before he puts the resin on. But what I wanted you to see here, if you notice, the keel is very small. It's not a typical keel with a weight on it. There's no weight at all. What he used to stabilize the boat was all of the food, the hundreds of cans of food, and the water, the 30 gallons of water that he brought, and gasoline in tanks down in the cabin. And the reason he designed it like this was so that if he got hit by a huge wave or a huge wind gust, he didn't want it to tip all the way over. And if you had a bigger keel, the resistance would make it so that the boat wasn't going to move sideways at all. It would just tip. And this way, it could sort of skid, I guess, or I guess I wasn't in it to actually feel what happened, but that was his design. And he was very proud. I don't think I have a picture in here of this, but he was very proud of the boat and how it would self-right. So if it did get knocked over, it would pop back up. And I think he said it had 100 pounds or more of lift because he would put Sally out on the mast on the dock, and it could lift her off the dock. So he knew that it would pop back up. That was without a big lead keel. It was just all the weight inside the boat. Okay, so here's Gerry in the boat in the Boatworks Bay over by Tally's, and the picture of Frank Zeller painting that he did of it. And so he went out to test the boat on White Bear Lake. And to get a little more extreme experience in extreme conditions, he would go out in the worst weather. Somewhere he was quoted as saying, well, everyone else would be coming into the dock to get off the lake, and I'd be going out the other way. And so he would go out there in storms. One time it was, I don't know if it was actually a tornado, but tornado-like activity and a big thunderstorm, and Gerry is out on the lake sailing around, and Sally's down at the dock at Tally's wondering, where is he? Where is he? And finally he came back. But he wanted to see what would happen if you're out there in a 60-mile-an-hour or whatever wind. And he was very happy with what he discovered. Okay, so I talked a little bit about lists. Gerry wrote everything down. He had these notebooks and he wrote everything down. Here's the expenses. Oh, am I missing? Oh no. Yeah, these are the expenses, and you can see the total on the bottom right there. $2,924 he spent on Yankee Girl for the first trip. Some of it at Johnson's, you can see there, $25. And I don't know, I'm not going to go through them all, but you get the idea. So there's paper after paper like this that were gifted to the Historical Society from the Spiess family. And when I visited their farm last summer, I realized what kind of reader and person he was to discover how to do things and what other people had done. And so he had these bookcases, and there were book after book about all of the adventures, you know, from Shackleton or Kon-Tiki or I don't know, I'm just making this up, but on a raft for 60 days with no food or anything, you know, kind of stuff. And he read all of those and he learned from them what to do, how did they survive? And so he was preparing and preparing. So 50 of those books we brought to the Historical Society, and about half of them are reference books, I would say, how to do stuff like these here on celestial navigation or boat building with plywood. And then there were the other half were these adventure books. And his favorite book that he liked to read, it'll be there. So if you want to come read it, it was, I think it was about around the world sailing, and that was his favorite book. Okay, so lists and more lists. What you see here are 3 different lists: gear to buy, to do in spring, and his ranking of canned foods. So, which is pretty interesting. He would try all these foods because what he took along, other than some beef jerky that Sally made, there was, and some fresh eggs and fresh fruit. It was all store-bought canned goods. And I can't read it on here, but Dinty Moore beef stew was highly rated. Chicken a la king was one of his favorites. And, you know, if you can read it, good for you. But some things he didn't like. It was too greasy or whatever. So if you're going to go on a trip, maybe you could come there and read the list. Okay, when he packed his supplies, he took a lot of books along, and this raft book was one kind of about surviving if you're on a raft in the middle of the ocean, from other people's experience, from this Harold Gaddy's experience. And then he always took the How to Navigate Today, but he also had navigation books, like I said, these reference books that were this thick. And he read them, and he had Jackie Potts read them before they went on trips with Jerry's dad and them, so that they all knew how to navigate. And then he took a lot of books to read, because what you probably wouldn't expect is, and I was kind of shocked to find this out, instead of, me being a sailor, instead of him up there steering all the way across the ocean, he didn't steer very much at all. He was inside the cabin trying to stay dry and out of the hot sun or whatever, and he was sleeping and eating and reading and listening to tapes. So the things that he liked to read, he took 30 Reader's Digests, he took Thoreau, he took James Herriot books, and tapes of music and Prairie Home Companion on the Atlantic trip. I don't know what he took on the Pacific trip, but he read a lot, and surprisingly, he only slept, well, I'll get to that later. Okay, we'll just stick to this. Okay, this is Jerry's map of how he got to Virginia Beach, where he started his voyage. And one of the funnier things about the story is, all the way there, people were asking, what kind of boat is this? Or they were trying to figure it out. And then they all started saying, is this a submarine? I think it's a submarine. Jerry finally, when he got to Pennsylvania, which is about 2/3 of the way, at the toll booth, one of the attendants said, is that a submarine? And Jerry finally just said, yep, it is. That's a submarine. And the guy goes, I knew it was. And so, but, okay. So now we're going from Norfolk, they say, but it's really Virginia Beach is where he launched, which is near there, to Falmouth, England. And in this next slide, Jerry shows his route he showed him in his presentations this map of how he got there. So it's interesting, you can see he's got the Gulf Current on here, and he's got the path, and where he saw different ships are noted. He didn't see that many ships, and that was kind of a disappointment to him, because he wanted to report back and let people know he was still alive. And there weren't any ships that would listen to him. He would radio to them, and they didn't have their radios on, and so he'd just get frustrated and started calling them names and like these dumb people or what. Anyways, but he okay, so he got about halfway on June 19th. He started on June 1st, but halfway, I guess, distance-wise. These were some examples from his recordings. Well, first I should say, when he was just starting out over in here for like a whole week or a little more, he had terrible weather. He wasn't making good progress. The wind was blowing the wrong direction, and he was just going up and down and couldn't get out of the cabin, and it was terrible. So starting after that, and then all along the way, he said many times, and this is the last voyage I'll ever make. And then he said, on the good side, the boat sails itself, and I pretty much sleep and read. So he did have, on that halfway, you see the Josepha was the ship's name. And Jerry happened to be up at night. He was eating something. He had the cabin light on, and all of a sudden, he turned the light off, and then he looked out the window, the little cabin light. That's all the light going both ways was through this little porthole light. I mean, a porthole window. And there was this tremendous, he used the word tremendous light out there. And then he got all excited because there was a ship. So he got on the radio and he wasn't thinking about the whole thing about, I could have gotten run over. It was 100 feet away going by. And he had a radar deflector up. And so he's thinking the ship must have seen me on the radar. And so anyways, he got on the radio, talked to him, and then they sent a message back to the U.S. Coast Guard, and then they sent a message to Sally and told him that that's where he was. But he was really lucky because the only reason that they saw him was that little window, the lights coming through those little windows. And then he realized, this could have been really bad. If I would have seen him coming at me, I'd have been just scared out of my pants, because, he would have had to start the motor, get out of the way, or wouldn't know where to go. It was all dark. So after that, he realized since the radar deflector didn't work, or reflector, whatever the right term is, he put a strobe light up on the mast at night, every night. And then he also shined a flashlight on the sail so he would be much more visible. But he was lucky that time. Okay, so this is inside Yankee Girl. Now this, if you look closer, you'll notice this is staged because he's all clean shaven. But it's really kind of a sweet thing here. It shows you where he kept his books over on the bookshelf over there. And then this is his navigation box. And in the navigation box is a picture that he took of Sally. Literally took the photograph and then took it on the trip. And so he would get the tools out and plot his course, figure out where he was. And whenever he was feeling down, he would open up the box and look at Sally. Okay, let's see. So it's pretty realistic, but it's not him on the ocean. Okay, now this is typical of Gerry. He's always thinking ahead how he can do things better. So he made these forms for navigating or figuring out the calculations with the sextant, and I can't explain how it works. I have no idea. I don't know how to navigate, but he had these and it made it simpler for him because what he said was everything on the ocean was hard. You had to make yourself do stuff because he was tired, he was under stress. He said the whole trip he was scared and he was tired, and whatever he could do to make it easier is what he had learned from previous trips, and he had to sleep, and otherwise you start to hallucinate. So I learned something from this map, and when you look at it, you can see how he planned his route. This is called a pilot chart. This is for the whole North Atlantic. And if you look at there's all these rectangles on here, every little quadrant of the ocean. And then there's a circle in the middle with a number on it. And that number says how windy it is in that area for the whole year, or the typical winds. Those are on the Beaufort scale. So it might be, I think like 4 might be 11 to 14 miles an hour, or something like that, or knots. So that says where what the winds are. Then you also have the currents. All these arrows are where the ocean currents go. So you can look at that and say, well, if I go here, I'm gonna get in the current that's gonna take me the wrong way. Or if I go there, there might not be very much wind to the time of year I'm gonna go. So that's what he used to figure out where he should head to get to England. And then I just wanted to point this out in here. I don't have a picture of him changing sails and stuff, but basically his jobs when he was out there were, his main job besides eating and sleeping and navigating was managing the sails. So he wrote, when I got up this morning, she was moving very slowly, however. The winds had died down, so I hoisted the main, I got her moving with the main and jib, and then had some breakfast and so on. Then the wind started to come up a little bit, so I had to reef the main. And I've run all day today, now with the boat steering itself. So he's continually changing the sails, more sail up, more down, put 2 jibs out, put the spinnaker out. That was his main job besides, just what he needed to do to survive, eat and drink and sleep. So now this is where you can really see how he could plan this out. This is as he's approaching England. If you look at those lines on there, you can see the current is coming from the west and the winds are coming from the west. So he knew that he had to be pretty much straight west of Falmouth so he could get there. Because if you notice, the current will take you up to Ireland if he's too far north, and it will take you south towards Spain. And if you get headed down there, he might not ever get back up to England. So he really was very, very focused on keeping due west of England, or of the Channel. Okay, you can also see in this map where it says the Potomac, that was the ship that he finally got a message back to tell people that he was going to be coming to England pretty soon, because he was really getting upset that he might get there and there might not be any of his family there and no one else would know he's coming, and because he didn't publicize any of this stuff. Well, he as he got closer, I gotta just get a little water here again.
What year was this?
This was 1979, July of 1979. Okay, so Gerry, he planned out all this. Those were the clothes he had saved to put on, so when he got there, he looked good and probably didn't smell so bad. But I don't know. What he did with all his clothes, once he wore them, there's no washing machine inside the boat, so they just went into the ocean and probably disintegrated. But he put on all those nice clothes, and he was trying to get the American flag up, and he's sitting there thinking, did the Coast Guard get the message from the ship? Will Sally and others be here to see me arrive? He had no idea, because there was no communication back to him. Okay. Well, meanwhile, on another boat, the KSTP reporters and Sally and Gerry's parents were headed out 12 miles in the ocean to figure out where Gerry was. And she's thinking, where's Yankee Girl? And will we find Gerry before the others do? Well, they lucked out because there was a very knowledgeable pilot boat captain, and he had a good idea of where Gerry would go, because he knew he wouldn't want to be going right in where all the other ships were going into the English Channel. So he kind of snuck around a different way, and sure enough, the guy was right, and they found him. And Sally screamed out and they're all pointing, and I think she yelled out, "Ahoy, Yankee Girl." Okay, so then here's where Sally meets Jerry. After 54 days and 3,287 miles at sea. So, by the way, I want to thank the KSTP and Hubbard Broadcasting people for letting us use all of these photos that they came from the TVs and radio stations. Glenn Griffin is right here. He's been instrumental in helping with all this, and some of the photos you'll see in a few minutes, he helped reproduce those so that we could put them in the PowerPoint. But he's been a great help, so thanks, Glenn. Okay, now from the quaint little meeting of the two boats, it was just crazy. In Falmouth, there were 30,000 people lined up on the one shoreline waiting to see the little boat come in. And then there were boats everywhere. He said that the most dangerous part of the trip, one of the most dangerous parts of the trip, was when he was just trying to get into the harbor. And they would all come up close in big boats and waves. And I don't know, he was afraid some little kid was going to fall off into the ocean. And he just was worried about the whole ordeal. Well, he did finally get in. And then there were thousands of people, as you can see in this picture, on the shore. And it was just amazing. And so he had been thinking, I wonder if there'll be any publicity about this. Well, meanwhile, Sally was doing her job, getting all of this stuff, making people aware of that Gerry was going to show up. And one of the things we discovered in the tubs of things that we got from the Spiess family were all of these notes. I just found these about a week or two ago, that these were things that they saved from when they were at the hotel, and all of this correspondence and messages. So here's call ABC, they want to talk to you. And then there was the National Enquirer and the Tonight Show and Congressman Vento and Northwest Bank, who wanted to put the boat on display. And then the Express newspaper, I think there's another part of the name of that, but they owned the Queen Elizabeth, and they had a boat show in London, and they wanted the boat at the boat show, and they were going to let them go back on the Queen Elizabeth and take the Yankee Girl on it one way or the other. And it was just crazy. The mayor kind of adopted them for the week or so, and this is the schedule when the car is going to pick them up, or what do they call it? Something. When is the? I can't find it. Anyways, they picked him up to take him to the church where they're having a special service, thanking God for him getting there safely. And then they had a council meeting, and they had other things, and they were just chauffeuring he and his parents all around town for a whole week to go to these events. So the amazing thing that I don't know how many people actually knew if it got out, but the National Enquirer paid Gerry, Sally, to have an exclusive on the story for 2 weeks from when they published. So when they got there, the people put the boat away while Gerry's doing stuff, and then the National Enquirer came along and said, well, we got to put it back in the water and take pictures with you and stuff to go in the National Enquirer. And I have not seen the cover of the National Enquirer, but it was on the cover, and he did get paid for doing that. And so when he would talk to the other news media, he couldn't tell them all the story. He could tell them a little bit here and there, and yeah, I'm feeling good, or whatever, but he didn't tell them all the stories. And So then they had to write up the story while he was over there and listen to these tapes he had made so they could do that. So I never imagined when I first saw the National Enquirer, I just kind of chuckled, but apparently they got a nice chunk of money to do that. Okay, then there was also a newspaper, an English newspaper, that thought it was all a hoax. And so they had to have the Coast Guard send a message saying, well, he was reported at this spot and this spot and this spot by ships. And so this is all legitimate. Okay. When he returned, there were huge crowds at the airport and at White Bear Lake as well. There's Brad Stanius, the mayor, and maybe you recognize other people in there. And then it's interesting, the White Bear Press had an extra souvenir edition. So I don't know, you always hear about extra, read all about it. I guess this is our own White Bear Lake version of that. And you can see all the people at the Philip Brown House that were there to welcome him. And he got accolades from the president, President Carter, and Vice President Mondale. And President Carter said, "You have demonstrated that the progress and courageous spirit of our forefathers is alive and well." So he was a celebrity, and he was on Good Morning America. Am I looking at the clock right? Do we have? Is it?
Quarter to 6:45.
Okay. All right. I have a lot more to go, so I better go faster. Okay. Well, maybe we won't. We'll just. I do want you to know what Sally was thinking. I think that's an intriguing part of this whole story. So David Hartman on Good Morning America asked him, "How did your wife feel about just the dangerous aspect about going off and taking that kind of chance with her left at home?" And Gerry said, "Well, she sailed with me before, so she knows what's involved, and for that reason, she doesn't like me to do it. Because she understands the hardship and what's involved, the danger, but she knows that I'm a very compulsive planner and preparer. So she knew that I had done absolutely everything that was possible to make the journey a safe one." And so that's what I've seen about Gerry, that he just planned so much and studied and all that. So, okay, I'm going to skip that part. And this is kind of funny. He asked him about what do you say to people who say, "Gerry, you're crazy?" He said, "Well, I don't like the people to say that because it just shows that they don't have an appreciation of what's involved in terms of planning. And if you were to just jump in a boat and go, I could say that would be crazy. But I've spent many, many years on this problem, and anyone that undertakes an adventure like this, whether it's mountain climb, whatever, the ones that succeed are those that put in the planning. So that's the most fascinating part of the trip. I prefer that side to sailing." Okay. All right. So now we're going to switch here a little from Atlantic to the Pacific. So actually, this newspaper article wasn't about going in Yankee Girl. It was about going in a 28-foot boat, which he didn't do then. But I thought it was a good segue into the Pacific story. So Gerry had to fix up Yankee Girl to go on the next adventure across the other ocean. So he sanded off all the, or not all the fiberglass, but sanded it down and then refiberglassed it and made it ready to go on another trip. So he started in Long Beach, California, and he went to Hawaii first, then to a small island called Fanning Island, which is straight south of Hawaii. And I've seen the pictures from there. It's a beautiful little island, but it was very hard for him to find because all he could see was some palm trees sticking up it. Well, there's no mountains or anything. It was more like a sand island. And he found it and he was just ecstatic because he just stumbled across it. He looked at his navigation stuff and well, it should be right around here. And then there it was. So he was super excited. Okay, well, then he had to do a little work on the boat. When he got to Hawaii, it was the cabin was wet and moldy, and he had to clean and sand and repaint it before he could go further. And then here he is now heading out from Hawaii to that Fanning Island. And maybe, Dan, maybe we should skip the other thing for the movie for right now.
I would play it.
Okay, well, let's try.
Yeah.
I wanted to play a little clip of one of the movies that Glenn helped digitize, because you can't comprehend what it would be like in that little boat in big waves. So hopefully we have this in the right spot here. So this is calm for him right now. Now just wait. Okay, now watch this. There. How would you like that for your Sunday afternoon relaxing?
You see how it gets pushed along?
Yeah. Now imagine that for
3,000.
for days at a time. He had to wedge himself. Isn't this crazy? He had to wedge himself inside the boat so that he didn't get knocked all around. And he said that on the Atlantic trip, he had bruises all over everywhere, and he had knocked his head a couple times. And so he was just really lucky that he never got severely injured while he was in the cabin.
So I got a question.
Yes?
Okay,
Yeah.
who's been taking these pictures then?
Well, on the Pacific trip, the KSTP, Jason Davis and others went along and filmed all along the trip at different places. And so the first trip, he didn't tell any of the media, so there was nothing to show. But on this one, they started out and they had, people at the dock and the camera people. And so that's why there's video of this now. So it's extra special stuff. Okay, so we'll keep going across the Pacific. So unlike the Atlantic trip, he made multiple stops on the Pacific trip. After Hawaii and Fanning Island, he went to Samoa Islands and Fiji and New Caledonia. And then his last leg of the voyage was from New Caledonia to Sydney, Australia. And this is Gerry coming into Sydney. He did use his motor a fair amount if there was no wind, or to get into the harbors and stuff instead of trying to sail with all the traffic around. Evinrude, a 4-horse on the way on the Atlantic and a 4.5 horse across the Pacific. Okay, now you can see he's pretty excited here. He made it across another ocean, and he's ready to see his family and get back to some other life. And when he got back here again, he was welcomed home by Governor Cui and others, Mayor Stanius. And then a couple of years later, he donated Yankee Girl to the Minnesota Historical Society, and gave two presentations, I think 2 nights in a row at the North Oaks Country Club for the Minnesota Historical Society members. Okay, so after the trips in Yankee Girl, Gerry and Sally moved to a 600-acre farmstead near Hinckley. And that fulfilled another dream of Gerry's, which he talked about this on these recordings when he was going across the ocean. He had like 4 things he wanted. And one was when he got home, he was going to do stuff that would make Sally happy. And then one was to get some property and just homestead and build a cabin and so on, a la Thoreau. So it wasn't a cabin that they built. It was a very nice country home. And Gerry continued an assortment of adventures. In 2019, he passed away after 10 years dealing with Parkinson's disease. And the other adventures were planes. He had a couple planes, or maybe more than two, Daryl? Yeah, several planes. One open cockpit one, but I'm not going to get into that. That's for another day. And he rode jet skis down the Mississippi and motorcycles all over, and he built and sailed other boats. But there's just too much to try and cover right now. So there'll be more about some of his boat building and other boats stories that will be in my book when that comes out. And then I thought this is a appropriate, a fitting quote to wrap up. So Gerry's friend and sailor and co-author Marlon Bree, who lives over in, I think, North Oaks or Shoreview, he said, though Yankee Girl is gone from sight and will never put her bow in another wave or cross another ocean, her adventures still fire the imaginations of sailors everywhere. What she and her sailor accomplished rank among the greatest seafaring tales of all time.